My mother-in-law believed she could outsmart me, convinced that she could manipulate me into signing a loan document and gifting her a house for free. It's as if she thinks I'm incredibly naive, but little does she know, I have a plan that will leave her utterly embarrassed. I don't really care about her opinion on the matter. Before I married my husband, I had high hopes for a positive relationship with my mother-in-law. Having lost my own mother as a teenager, I thought a great mother-in-law could help fill that void. Unfortunately, my expectations were shattered when I met my worst nightmare in human form during my relationship with Bob. When Bob and I began dating, meeting his family was something I eagerly anticipated. Unbeknownst to me, my eagerness might have seemed desperate to some, leading Bob to repeatedly postpone the introduction. Eventually, I met his parents, and I instantly fell in love with them. Maria, Bob's mother, initially seemed like someone I wanted to impress, not in the conventional sense, but rather to become her favorite daughter-in-law. From the third month of dating, Bob and I knew we were heading towards marriage due to our compatibility. Like me, Bob and his parents were born in Europe, but they were Americans proficient only in English. Bob had hinted a few times that his mother could become a burden in the future, but I dismissed the warnings. I genuinely cared for her and willingly helped with chores whenever she asked. My motivation stemmed from a desire to amend mistakes from my teenage years, during which my relationship with my own mother was strained. Despite Bob's warnings, I disregarded the possibility of being manipulated by his mother. I aimed to build a strong bond, having had failed attempts with older women in the past. Even when Bob cautioned me, I believed he simply wanted his mother to have some space. However, I started noticing signs that she might be taking advantage of our relationship. For instance, Bob's mother would intentionally neglect her dishes on the days she knew I would be visiting, hinting at a hidden agenda. Upon my arrival, I willingly took on the responsibility of doing the dishes and tidying up her chaotic kitchen. The same applied to grocery shopping. Adding to the complexity, Maria was disabled and relied on a limited disability check. Despite its inadequacy, she would frequently call me to borrow money. My inability to say no, coupled with my fear of being perceived as a bad person, led me to comply. Over the 2 years of Bob and I dating, my relationship with his mother flourished. Even when I sensed that she was taking advantage of me, I hesitated to stop my actions. The constant borrowing, whether it was $50 or $100, didn't bother me because I wanted Maria to be content. She had come to view me as her own, and I guess she exploited that connection. Deep down, every smile I elicited from Maria made me feel like I was rectifying the mistakes of my troubled teenage years. As a teenager, I unknowingly caused my single-parent mother a lot of distress. It wasn't until I grew older and she passed away that I understood the gravity of my actions. Despite her efforts, I constantly compared her to others and eventually ran away from home. I didn't return until her demise, leaving her with a skewed perception of her motherhood. This painful realization fueled my actions toward Maria. Eventually, Bob and I got married, marking one of the happiest moments of my life. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was the joy of having a supportive family to fall back on. I could officially call Maria Mom, and as a nurse, I became her personal caregiver, bringing us even closer. Little did I know that Maria didn't reciprocate my feelings as much as I loved her. She seemed to be the type who went above and beyond, even with those she cherished. About a year into our marriage, Maria began urging us to have children. Bob and I, however, had decided to wait at least 3 years before starting a family. When we explained our reasoning to Maria, little did I know that this decision would unravel a new chapter in our relationship. She vehemently opposed our decision, immediately presenting us with a litany of reasons why we should start a family sooner rather than later. At that time, Bob had been laid off from his job, placing the financial burden squarely on my shoulders. Despite our own challenges, Maria continued to call, requesting to borrow money. She often complained about the meager disability funds she received. In her texts, she acknowledged her debts and promised to repay as soon as she had the means. Strangely, I never bothered to keep track, lending money out of love rather than expecting repayment. Maria, however, consistently reminded me of the amounts she owed, perhaps attempting to reassure me of her intention to settle the debts. Initially, I thought Maria's insistence on us having children early would subside after we explained that we weren't ready. However, each visit to her house or dinner turned into an opportunity for her to bring up the topic. Initially tolerable, her persistence escalated to sending YouTube videos, baby pictures, and images of happy families. It became overwhelming, prompting me to confide in Bob. His attempt to address the issue only worsened it, as Maria began offering unsolicited advice, even recommending fertility doctors. Her assumptions reached a breaking point when she suggested I might be barren, throwing a tantrum. Frustrated by her incessant interference, I distanced myself. I reduced visits and limited phone calls to once or twice a week, ensuring Bob was present during our conversations. Fortunately, after 2 years of marriage, Maria seemed to grasp the gravity of her behavior. She accepted that we would start a family when we felt ready, not succumbing to her wishes. Even though our closeness had diminished, Maria remained in my thoughts, and I extended help whenever possible. By this time, she had recovered and resumed work, reducing her financial requests. About 4 months later, with Maria back at work, Bob secured a high-paying job in another country. Gradually, I found myself rekindling a closer connection with Maria. This time around, our relationship seemed to have transcended the need for favors, and she was now capable of handling tasks she couldn't before. While I had friends to hang out with, I believe that a mother holds a unique place in our lives, distinct from our friendships. Thinking that Maria no longer required my assistance, I was blindsided when I discovered her attempt to deceive me into signing her home loan papers. For weeks, she had been discussing a purchase, leading me to trust her without confirming the details. Initially, she mentioned needing my signature for a car, but one day, I stumbled upon a message on her phone that revealed the truth. The papers were not for a car, but for a home loan. Enraged, I contemplated confronting her immediately but feared the hurtful words that might ensue. Instead, I kept silent and left after she returned with snacks. Back at my apartment, I pondered ways to outsmart Maria and eventually devised a plan. I created a document in our country's native language, knowing she was proficient only in English and wouldn't understand its content. When Maria called, stating she had obtained the papers for the dealer and inviting me to sign them, I seized the opportunity. Carrying the bogus document, I requested a copy in my native language. Maria, unsuspecting, agreed. I left her house, claiming I needed to print the subtitled document, and returned minutes later with the fabricated paper I had prepared the previous night. Upon my return, I convinced Maria that we should both sign this document instead of the original home loan papers. Obligingly, she agreed. Rushing off to work in the afternoon, I promised to drop by later in the evening. When I returned to Maria's house that night, I anticipated her realization of the ruse, expecting her to send the papers back to the company. To my astonishment, her reaction was quite unexpected. I attended a small house party that Maria had organized, unaware that she was celebrating the successful signing of the house loan papers. She had invited her friends, and the atmosphere was filled with laughter and drinks. Little did I know, everyone in the room, except my father-in-law, was privy to Maria's deceptive act. Upon entering the house, I sensed that Maria wasn't thrilled to see me. Her attention was solely on her guests. To add insult to injury, they openly discussed the loan in my presence. Realizing the situation, I decided to play ignorant. I inquired about the loan paper Maria mentioned, and she burst into laughter, even mockingly calling me a poor thing. She reveled in her successful trickery, claiming she duped me into signing her home loan papers under the guise of getting a new car. I allowed her to revel in her moment of triumph for a brief moment before revealing that I was well aware of her deception. Even if I hadn't known Maria's intention, I would have figured it out the day I signed. After all, everything on the document was plainly written in English. I couldn't help but wonder how she planned to get my signature without me reading the document first. Opting for a more dignified response, I remained calm despite her attempts to provoke a reaction. To spoil her celebratory mood, I challenged Maria to translate a line from the document she held. Initially hesitant, she complied after sensing my determination. The first line revealed my awareness. I am attempting to deceive my daughter-in-law, but I've been busted because she already knows. As she read out the damning line, Maria's eyes widened in anger. Without wasting time, she erupted into a tirade, hurling insults and regretting her son's marriage to me. Her hurtful words cut deep, and I couldn't stand being humiliated in front of the guests. I fired back, asserting my innocence and refusing to be blamed for her deceptive actions. I harbored no regrets for exposing the truth, considering it a necessary lesson for Maria. Maria understood that convincing me to sign her home loan papers would be a challenge. Resorting to deception, she tricked me into signing them, thinking it was a clever move on her part. Unfortunately, this maneuver led to significant tension between Bob and me. Maria, likely playing the victim, must have informed Bob that I insulted and humiliated her in front of her friends. It has been a week, and Bob refuses to answer my calls or respond to messages. The frustrating part is that he hasn't heard my side of the story, and despite repeated attempts, all my calls go straight to voicemail. He was supposed to return home last weekend, but he hasn't, and there's been no communication. Despite feeling regretful about the strange situation with Bob, I stand by my decision not to regret exposing Maria's deception. The question I have is whether I am in the wrong for outsmarting Maria and responding assertively to her actions. Despite her being my mother-in-law and an elder, I couldn't let her manipulate the situation. I'm eager to hear your comments. Update number 1. I appreciate the comments on my original post. It hasn't been easy since last week when Bob returned home with an attitude. Despite my attempts to explain everything, he insists that it was wrong of me to humiliate his mother. He seems to overlook the fact that his mom tried to deceive me into signing her home loan papers. Bob is so angry that he believes I should have called him when I discovered Maria's intentions. I haven't spoken to or visited Maria since then, still shocked at how she treated me despite all I did for her. The most frustrating part is that Bob is now threatening divorce if I don't apologize to Maria. In a heated argument 2 days ago, he left the house in the morning with some belongings. Later that evening, I discovered he was at his mother's house with a woman from his past, boldly posting pictures on Facebook. They appeared to be enjoying themselves while I dealt with loneliness. I expected Bob to understand the situation from my perspective and acknowledge his mother's wrongdoing. He hasn't spoken to her or condemned her actions, and for 2 days, Bob has been elusive since expressing that he'd rather lose me than let a woman jeopardize his relationship with his parents. It's painful to hear Bob now perceive me as a homewrecker, especially when he knows the genuine reasons behind my compassionate treatment of his mother. I had confided in him about my past with my own mom, and he used that vulnerability against me, hurling insults and uttering things I never expected from him. Even if I were to apologize to Maria for exposing her deceit, the dynamics between us can never return to how they used to be. I can't envision myself getting along with her or any of Bob's family members ever again. While those who know me often describe me as kind and soft, I'm contemplating a change. I don't want to be perceived as the soft, weak jade any longer, but the dilemma lies in whether being rude to Maria is reason enough for Bob to consider divorce. I love Bob deeply and don't want to lose him. Please advise me on what course of action I should take. Although Bob sounded serious, part of me wonders if he's bluffing, or is this an ominous sign of something worse? Update number 2. Following some suggestions to talk to Bob, I decided to confront him at his mother's house. To my surprise, Lisa, Bob's ex-girlfriend, was there with him and his parents, evident from their laughter within. Bob was furious at my unexpected appearance, asserting that I was no longer welcome there. In an attempt to salvage our relationship, he demanded that I apologize to his mother. Desperate to make things work and missing Bob immensely, I reluctantly apologized to Maria. However, It wasn't heartfelt, and Maria insisted on writing an apology for me to read. To my shock, the apology Maria penned contained demeaning content, prompting an immediate change of heart. I walked out of the house, and Maria, Bob, and Lisa laughed as I left. Betrayed and hurt, I texted Bob about my readiness for divorce and contacted a divorce lawyer. Instead of begging or clarifying, Bob's response was a simple okay. Before meeting Maria, Bob had mentioned that Maria held affection for Lisa, but they had ended things because he felt Lisa wasn't the one for him. Reflecting on my actions, I realized how foolish I had been. Despite suspicions, I had often dismissed the thought of Bob cheating on me. He always took calls from his parents in my presence, but for other calls, he would excuse himself to answer outside. In hindsight, there were signs of a possible affair, but I had brushed them aside, not wanting to succumb to baseless assumptions that could ruin a marriage. I refrained from jumping to conclusions until I was certain about Bob's actions. Even though Bob wasn't cheating, taking Lisa to his mother's house felt like a direct insult. In my view, divorce seems to be the best resolution, and I wish there was a way to teach Maria a lesson, but I'll let her be. Update number 3. I want to express my gratitude to all of you for your invaluable support. Among the numerous comments, the suggestion that stood out was to make Maria pay back all the money she borrowed. After gathering proof, I decided to sue her. Before filing the case, I messaged her, demanding repayment, but she didn't respond. I also texted Bob, and his dismissive response pushed me to proceed with the legal action. I filed the case and waited for Maria to be served. The sum she owed me exceeded $3,500, and I had evidence in the form of text messages. Maria's reaction upon being served was furious. She bombarded my phone with calls. I deliberately avoided answering. Bob and his father also reached out, suggesting an out-of-court settlement, and Bob professed his love. Disgusted, I blocked him, but he persisted with another number. The day of the court hearing arrived, and Maria showed up with her entire family, including Bob and his father as witnesses. They glared at me while the judge questioned me. I explained myself, but to my surprise, Maria denied borrowing any money and even claimed she used to borrow from Bob, not me. I presented the printed messages to the judge, but Maria laughed, dismissing them as potentially forged. Fortunately, the detailed content of the messages, mentioning disability amounts and other specifics, convinced the judge. The court ruled in my favor, ordering Maria to repay the $3,750. This experience has taught me not to love someone more than they love me. I'm relieved to have my money back and can start anew. Dragging Maria to court was a satisfying experience. She had avoided bringing up the money after resuming work, and I hadn't asked for it, given my initial intention of helping her out of love. However, realizing the lack of genuine affection from Maria and her family, I chose to stand up for myself. Thank you all for your support. I've become stronger, wiser, and smarter because of you. Regarding the divorce, as soon as the papers are ready, I'll be officially ending things with Bob. You guys are the best, and I'm grateful for the recovery of nearly $4,000.